Matt Ryan could have a new day job, and it could be calling the shots for the Atlanta Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy. Of course, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, still going strong here on Locked On Falcons. Past 9 years, we're going into year 10 here of hosting your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's episode, we will be discussing the latest rumors suggesting that changes are coming for the Atlanta Falcons at head coach and or GM by year's end, including whether or not Matt Ryan could be rejoining the Falcons in some undisclosed, unknown capacity. And we'll also discuss the one compelling reason I think the Falcons could have if they decide to not move on from Raheem at the end of the season, potentially because they're eyeing a big fish like Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh. And we'll break all that down towards the end of today's episode. But let's start with the news of the day. Fox Sports' NFL insider Jay Glazer reported on Sunday that Matt Ryan might be rejoining the Atlanta Falcons. And we got this in a tweet from Jay. Scoopage. The Atlanta Falcons have had conversations with their former Pro Bowl quarterback, Matt Ryan, about rejoining the Falcons in a front office role. While the two sides still discussing, people close to Ryan say he's seriously considering this move and talks are ongoing. It would be for a significant role in the front office. So, interesting, right? Big news, I guess. You know, and I'm sure there are plenty of people, and I've talked to many people that are really excited about this. For me, again, I got to be the hater. I got to pee in the punch bowl. But I'm just like, I need to know a little bit more information before I can get excited about this. What exactly is Matt Ryan going to be doing? Right? Because when you look at the history of hiring former players / NFL broadcasters, that their current job is NFL broadcasting with no front office experience whatsoever, those aren't usually well-run organizations, right? And basically the way I would explain that is if this wasn't Matt Ryan, if you just took Matt Ryan out of it and you said Tony Romo, Mark Sanchez, or Jonathan Vilma, and you replace Matt Ryan with one of those names, would you be looking at this move positively? Probably not. But because it's Matt Ryan, and we collectively have a very positive association with Matt Ryan because of his on-field experience and performance over 14 years here in Atlanta, we get excited about that. And I had an insider basically said to me earlier today when the news broke, this makes me nervous, honestly. This sounds eerily similar to an idea that I'd find from a Falcons fan on Twitter. And I kind of agree with him. I feel like this is what a random person on Twitter would say, like, we should hire Matt Ryan to be the GM. And it's like, why? And it's basically their only explanation is because, well, I like Matt Ryan and I don't like Rich McKay or Terry Fontenot or Raheem Morris. And it's like, okay, and it's like, that's cool, right? But like when you look at these like broadcast turned front office people, you look at John Lynch, you look at Matt Millen, you look at Mike Mayock, now you have Tom Brady, but he's technically a minority owner or whatever. It's just like they don't usually come with a lot of success. And I know you're sitting there saying, well, John Lynch has been a successful GM. And it's like, has he? Is he just riding on Kyle Shanahan's coattails? Because like their draft record over the years in San Francisco is not very good in the 8+ years that he's been there, right? Like they've hit on some great day 3 mid-round picks like Fred Warner and George Kittle and Brock Purdy. But you look at those early round picks, outside of like Nick Bosa and Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel, it's been real rough for the 49ers in the early rounds. But that's just my opinion. So maybe your mileage may vary on John Lynch and whatnot. But it's like, to me, it's like, what exactly is Matt Ryan going to do, right? Is he going to be a consultant? Is he just going to be whispering in Arthur Blank's ear like, hey, do this, right? Is he going to help with the potential GM or coach search at the end of the year if the current guys get fired? Is he going to be making football decisions, right? He's going to influence who the Falcons, if they're looking for a new quarterback in the future, or they're going to stick with Michael Penix? Is Matt Ryan going to have influence over that? If the Falcons are looking for a new starting center in 2 years, is Matt Ryan going to be, being like, well, this guy reminds me a lot of Todd McClure, the center I played, most of my career with, or this guy reminds me a lot of Alex Mack. We should draft him, or these the types of things that Matt Ryan is going to sort of do. And I don't know. Again, without knowing that, it's hard for me to sit here and go like, oh, this is a good move for the Falcons, right? It feels a lot like something that we heard from none other than Jarvis Davis, right? Who he outlined about 10 days ago on the podcast, where he talked about the Falcons and Arthur Blank hiring someone to come in and basically oversee the organization. He called it a president of football operations for the 2026 year, right? Not fire Terry, not fire Raheem, have someone brought in to kind of oversee the organization and then make decisions after 2026 to do a full year of evaluation, bring in someone brand new to sort of have that role. And it's like, maybe that's what the Falcons are envisioning Matt Ryan, but what makes Matt Ryan qualified for that? Because he was a successful quarterback, semi-successful quarterback, like, again, and I'm not taking shots at Matt Ryan. I'm just sitting here going like, why would he be uniquely qualified to do that? Right. Just because like, okay, Arthur Blank and him have a pretty strong relationship, it would seem, but like, I'm sure Arthur Blank has a pretty strong relationship with his barber. Like, is that person qualified to be, the president of football operations? Again, I know it's different, guys. I understand it's a little different with Matt Ryan, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just sitting here going like, why should I be excited about this? Is kind of where I'm at this point. And so we need to get more information on what Matt Ryan's role is going to be before I can really be like, okay, this is a good move or a bad move. But for the most part, it just kind of feels like a move that a flailing organization is like, well, we need somebody who has, nobody likes the people that are currently running the team. So we need to bring someone in the building that people actually like. And like, that's other than that, that's the only thing that is particularly compelling to me at this point in time. So we'll see on that front. But this just, to me, the only thing that gets me, quote unquote, excited when it comes to hearing this news about Matt Ryan is that it does at least strongly suggest that there will be changes at the end of the year. It's just another sort of piece of evidence that you're putting on, the growing mountain of evidence that we have, or, the very large molehill of evidence that we have right now that suggests that Arthur Blank is not content with the current status quo and that changes will be coming, and we'll parse through some more pieces of that molehill / mountain as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, talking about how the NFL insiders are saying the Falcons are heading into this direction. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge. But with Prize Picks, it always feels good to be right. With high-pressure football matchups every weekend in elite hoops action almost every night, the action never slows down, and Prize Picks lets you stay in control. They're the daily fantasy app that lets you build lineups based off of player projections. No drafts, no waiting. Just pick more on less on how you think guys will play. You can create a lineup in less than a minute, and you can choose from a huge range of unique stats like yards and fantasy score, 3-pointers made, whatever fits your strategy. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Have your health or family needs changed lately? Well, Georgia's got you covered. Georgia Access is our state's marketplace for Georgians to compare, apply, and enroll in health insurance plans that offer the best value for their individual needs. Open enrollment is happening right now. Visit georgiaaccess.gov today through January 15, 2026. Georgia Access, health insurance for Georgia by Georgia. So guys, before we continue today's episode, I want to let you know about the Everydayer Club that we have just launched here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I know many of you have hit me up over the years and said, Aaron, I love the show, but there's just too many ads. Well, guess what? You now get a streamlined, uninterrupted, ad-free version of Locked On Falcons by joining the Everydayer Club. That's one of many perks that you get. All you have to do is pay $5 a month or $50 a year, and you can find out that and all the other perks, as well as join at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. So, talking about the growing mountain of evidence when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons are making changes, James Palmer is one of the more recent NFL insiders last week suggesting that moves are coming, basically saying it is more likely to change than to stay packed, right? Which is not a particularly compelling thing, right? Nothing to the degree that Jason La Canfora of the Washington Post said a couple of weeks ago that we talked about on the podcast, where he said, Raheem Morris is as good as gone, but it's now Palmer, Breer, La Canfora, among others, that are suggesting moves are on the way. And it's notable because we're talking about Arthur Blank here, right? This is not a Terry Fontenot. NFL insiders giving us, what people are saying about Terry Fontenot, because we know that trying to get into Terry Fontenot's head is, it's like a labyrinth, because Terry's going to do his own thing. Terry's going to zig when you expect him to zag, up is down is up, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. But, when it comes to NFL insiders with Terry Fontenot, because of his conviction and all this stuff and, all the things that he does, NFL insiders are notoriously bad at trying to figure out what the Falcons are going to do. It's why every time we go to the draft, we're sitting here going like, I can't believe Terry did the thing that no one thought he was going to do, right? Or very few people thought he was going to do. With Arthur Blank, it's different. Arthur Blank is not a maverick. Arthur Blank is, much more of a conventional wisdom guy. And so NFL insiders telling us what Arthur Blank is thinking, seemingly when we hear from the James Palmers and the Albert Breers and the Jason La Canforas and the Ian Rappaports and Tom Pelisseros and the Diana Rossinis and all that stuff and more, that carries a little bit more weight. And so when we hear various insiders seeming to suggest that the Falcons are going in a certain direction, right, it's worth noting. And that direction is making a change. But nothing is final. And of course, we also had news that broke last week. Breer broke this. Which is the Falcons have hired a consulting firm called Sportsology to help them sort of do a health check of the organization, right? Now, what was interesting about that is Breer mentioned that the Falcons, or really Arthur Blank, has been partnered with this consulting firm for a while, right? Because it's not just the Falcons that are getting the scrutiny from outside the building, but it's the Atlanta United, as well as the new National Women's Soccer League team that, the expansion team that Blank was awarded 6 weeks ago or whatever it was, right? That they're bringing in Sportsology to help them oversee all of this stuff. So it's not just the Falcons. But again, why are you bringing outside help if you're not leaning towards making a move, right? That's basically what I'm trying to get. So it all suggests that we're going in that direction of changes are coming. But of course, the question is going to be, what exactly are those changes going to be, right? Is it going to be firing the special teams coordinator, right? Like that's the bare minimum at this point in time. But we will speculate endlessly about that until those changes do eventually occur. But, you've heard from me several times now over the last few weeks on this podcast that I am under the assumption that both Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot will be gone at year's end, right? Now, as they always say, when you make assumptions, all that stuff. But, because the NFL insiders are also suggesting this, it does feel like we're going in that direction. And so I don't think I'm not going to say it's a safe assumption, but it doesn't feel like this is like me walking out on a limb. This is the general vibes that we're getting. And we'll see how the next two games go. I do think how the Falcons perform over these final two games has a chance to influence things. Should they influence things? Not really. But this is the Falcons after all, right? They love to do the same things over and over and over again and pretend like, well, what we're doing, it's going to be different this time, right? 2019 should ring a bell where the Falcons, overrated how the Falcons played in the second half of the season in that 2019 season, brought back Dan Quinn. And 2020 was, the worst season that the Falcons have had record-wise, in whatever, 20 years or whatever it was. And so, Raheem Morris was part of that coaching staff. And so like you should be disincentivized to do that. Well, it's like, oh, well, they played pretty well. They won 4 out of the last 5 or whatever it winds up working out to being. And like, that shouldn't be a compelling reason for Arthur Blank, but you never know, right? I'm giving Arthur Blank the benefit of the doubt that he's learned from that mistake, but we'll see. We'll see on that front. So you can never trust the Falcons. But like, to me, the question, of course, is, will Arthur Blank make those changes? Right. Again, it seems like you're bringing in outside help. You're talking to Matt Ryan for an undisclosed role, significant role in the front office. Right. So that strongly suggests that you're trying to get outside eyeballs, on the people in the building, because the people in the building, are suspect, right? I was going to use a line from The Departed about, there's rats in the building, but I don't want to come on too strong there. But it's one of those situations where like it's all pointing in the direction that the Falcons are planning to make changes, but like there is, to me, still a world where the Falcons do stand pat, right? Even though I'm assuming that they're going to be changes, they're going to fire guys. I would not be shocked at all if the Falcons stand pat. And to me, there's only one compelling reason for the Falcons to do that, and it's because Arthur Blank is aiming to make a big splash, not in 2026, but in 2027, and I'll explain what that is, and that could be luring someone like Mike Tomlin to Atlanta as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So let's be real. When you started your business, tax withholdings and managing payroll spreadsheets were the last thing on your mind, but thankfully there's Gusto, our proud sponsor today, to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. Gusto will save you hours each week with their automated tools like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits, and you'll get real peace of mind knowing that you can reach certified HR experts anytime you need it. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL, and you'll get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that's gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. Bringing up that James Palmer report. James Palmer currently with Bleacher Report and Underdog Fantasy and The Athletic, and he used to work for NFL Network. He's all over the place, right? But he was talking about that Falcons report about more likely than not that the changes were coming. He also mentioned about he was talking about the overall coaching carousel, right? And to paraphrase, one of the things he said was that in talking with people around the league, like the perception of this year's coaching cycle is that this is not necessarily a great year to be hiring a head coach. And, he said there's no Ben Johnson. There's no sort of coordinator that's guaranteed to get a job if he wants one. There's no surefire, can't miss sort of candidate like that in this year's coaching cycle. And he basically said, unless someone that currently has a job becomes available. And he mentioned by name 4 candidates: Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh, Kevin Stefanski, and Sean McDermott. And basically, if any of those guys become available, they would shoot to the top of various teams' lists of potential candidates. And I certainly think the Falcons would be included among those teams where those guys would be near the top of the list. We mentioned Kevin Stefanski last week as one of a handful of candidates that the Falcons could hire this coaching cycle that would potentially keep Kirk Cousins as the starting quarterback in 2026, given their experience in Minnesota together. Cleveland, of course, should they retain Stefanski rather than firing him, is potentially one of the prime landing spots for Kirk Cousins to go to next year if and when the Falcons cut Kirk Cousins. As we speculated many times, that was probably the preferred landing spot for Kirk Cousins this past offseason if the Falcons had been able to work out a trade or cut him at that point in time. And I say all that to basically say that there's a world where Blank wants to fire Raheem and Terry, but kind of looks at this coaching cycle and all the candidates available, and he's just kind of like, I don't see a guy that I feel like is 100% definitely an upgrade over Raheem Morris, right? And there's no sort of compelling name that he automatically goes and says that guy's an upgrade, and that's who I'm going to hire. I'm going to fire Raheem Morris and then hire that guy. Right. And if we get none of those big names like Tomlin, Harbaugh, Stefanski, McDermott, or whatever, right, becoming available, then I could see Blank basically saying, okay, let's just run it back for 2026. Let's see, it's probably not going to be a great year, all that stuff. We'll just set up for 2027, right? And, it's interesting to me because Tomlin's an interesting candidate. There's like a team option for him after this season, I think, in order to extend his contract through the 2027 season, if I'm not mistaken. Again, Locked On Steelers would have more insight into this than I do. But like, I don't see a world where Tomlin gets fired after this season, even given the disappointment of the Steelers the last couple of years. That just doesn't seem like a very Rooney thing to do, the Rooneys that own that team. But I could see the Steelers basically saying, rather than exercising that team option, we might make Mike Tomlin available via trade, right? That's the only way I could see Mike Tomlin, departing Pittsburgh in the near future. And I could see Blank going after someone like a Mike Tomlin potentially via trade. But the challenge is going to be that the Falcons are going to have a hard time trading for a coach like Mike Tomlin or any of these other guys that we're talking about that are currently under contract, because they don't really have the draft capital, right? And so they may be waiting a year, right? You retain Raheem for 2026 because it's like, well, we don't have a first round pick that we're probably going to have to give up until 2027. So let's wait a year. And then if we can go after one of these big fish, we'll go after one of those big fish. It's basically enacting Jarvis Davis's plan, is that you give, Raheem and Terry another year, you evaluate everything, and then you make the big bold changes in 2027 when potentially the coaching cycle could be a better one. And you could sit there and say that makes some sense at face value, but like the difference is, like, this isn't a draft class, right? Where we always hear and say, and we're going to hear that again this year, where it's like, wait until next year when it comes to like the quarterback class. It was like, oh, it's going to be a better quarterback class next year, so don't draft a quarterback now unless you're getting like the top guy. Just wait until next year, right? Coaches aren't really like that, right? Just because these guys may or may not potentially be available this year doesn't mean they'll be available next year, right? Between now and the end of the 2026 season, when Blank and whoever could potentially go after one of these big fish, Sean McDermott or John Harbaugh could lead one of their respective teams to a Super Bowl win in the next year or two. And obviously the Ravens aren't going to do that this year, or I don't know. Have they been eliminated yet? I don't know. I don't think because the Steelers lost. But anyway, that's probably not going to happen this year, but it's possible that could happen next year, right? And then all of a sudden, like, they're off the market if they win a Super Bowl, right? The Steelers could figure out their quarterback position in the next calendar year, again, as doubtful as that seems to people right now, and suddenly start winning playoff games again. Who knows, right? The point being is that waiting another year isn't necessarily going to work out for you if that's the case, if that's the compelling reason behind Arthur Blank to sort of stay the course and bring this coaching staff back, Raheem Morris in the case, and then with changes, right? Like, again, I don't think the Falcons going to stand completely bad, but there will be changes. But, I could see Blank wanting to make a big splash, right? We saw him try to do that by trying to court Bill Belichick during the last coaching cycle, where they ultimately decided to hire Raheem Morris instead, right? We've seen Arthur Blank do this a number of times. It could be one of the reasons why he's looking at Matt Ryan, right? He's trying to look at a big splash. He's looking at, his hiring methodology not being particularly successful, and he's trying to, pawn it off on somebody else to do that sort of job, which is basically what Jarvis was talking about, a week and a half ago when he was talking about that being the way that the Falcons could fix the Falcons. Essentially, that's why he hired Rich McKay in the first place, right? Rich McKay was very successful in Tampa Bay, right? Decades of ineptitude for that Bucs franchise prior to Rich McKay's arrival in the early 90s. And within a decade, he had helped build a Super Bowl winner in that decade. And Arthur Blank was basically looking at the Falcons like, decades of ineptitude, come here and build a Super Bowl winner within 10 years. Obviously, that didn't work out. But, that vision, I think, is one of the main reasons why Rich McKay still sticks around, because he's the only person within this organization that has any sort of, serious success, has facilitated any sort of serious success elsewhere in the league, right? He has that hardware. And I could absolutely see a world where, Blank is trying to do a separate version of that, particularly with the head coach, by bringing in a Tomlin, bringing in a McDermott, bringing in a Harbaugh, someone who has that sort of pedigree, that proven winner, right? And, you know, when we look at these guys, like they could be available via trade, similar to what happened with Rich McKay and why Rich McKay ultimately got that hardware in Tampa Bay, because the Bucs traded for John Gruden to be their head coach in 2002. And we've seen these coaching trades. They aren't as prevalent as they were in the past, but we've seen it where teams have traded for coaches. Sean Payton is the most recent one. Bill Parcells famously got traded from the Patriots to the Jets, right? Mike Holmgren, moved from Green Bay to Seattle, and there was an exchange of draft picks. That basically, whenever a coach is currently under contract with another team, you have to compensate them with draft capital. Peyton is the most recent version. I think Bruce Arians was another recent example where he was still technically under contract for the Cardinals when he took the job in Tampa Bay back in 2019. Right. And so they wound up swapping like late round picks, I think, with the Bucs and Cardinals did. But for the most part, these bigger fish guys, typically the Paytons, the Parcells, the Holmgrens, right? Or no, Holmgren was a second round pick, but all these guys typically involve first round picks, right? Payton, Parcells, Gruden, Belichick. When he went from the Jets to the Patriots after being the Jets coach for like 3 hours or whatever it was, they all involved giving up first round trades. And again, it goes back to the point I said where the Falcons won't have the ammunition to do that until 2027 if they're going to do that. Now, I guess technically they could give up next year's first or whatever if they were to make a trade this offseason, and maybe would have to have even greater compensation in 2028 to compensate for the lack of ammunition that they have in 2026. But like, to me, that when I think about what I think Arthur Blank and his pattern of behavior is, like, that feels like a thing that Arthur Blank wants to do, that he wants to have this sort of set it and forget it to sort of mentality to this next hire, where, with few exceptions, there's a couple of obvious exceptions, but Arthur Blank is not necessarily known for being a meddler, right? And he wants to hire people to do the job and let them do their job. And ideally, he wants a person that can do the job of winning a Super Bowl. And if he has that guy flashing hardware in that interview or in that Zoom meeting, that's going to be very compelling. And it's an alluring idea. Now, I don't personally necessarily believe in all that, because I don't think hiring one guy is going to suddenly cause all the dominoes to fall that eventually lead to success. I think you have to methodically knock down each domino if you want to be successful, as opposed to that sort of one cascading effect, right? For example, like, we talked last week on the All 22 review talking about the Falcons basically being the worst short yardage team in the NFL for the last 5 or 6 years, right? Hiring Mike Tomlin doesn't automatically solve that issue, right? If you want to solve that issue, you got to potentially change your blocking scheme. You got to go out there and upgrade, your starting center or your starting left guard or whatever, right? And Mike Tomlin could, in theory, facilitate those changes. But until you make those changes, like, Mike Tomlin doesn't do anything, doesn't solve any problems other than winning the press conference or whatever in that case. And so that, to me, is the only justification I could see or understand Arthur Blank for retaining Raheem Morris, that he wants to hook a big fish, and the Falcons aren't currently in position to do that because none of these big fish are potentially available, right? Or the Falcons lack the ammo in terms of draft pick compensation to, so to speak, bait the hook, right? And so that, to me, mostly and only really applies to Raheem Morris. I don't think that applies to Terry Fontenot, right? Because I think you could definitely see the Falcons, retaining Raheem because it's like, oh, we can't get the coach we want this cycle, but maybe we'll get him the next cycle. But like, the GM is like, whatever. Like, I don't think you're doing that with the GM, right? You're probably clearing the path with the GM, and firing Terry Fontenot is part of that process. So I think Terry is on much thinner ice than Raheem Morris as far as that situation goes, but we'll see how it all plays out. But like, nowadays you don't necessarily have teams, giving it all up for a GM, right? That sort of one GM that's like, oh, this guy's going to be the architect of our team. Like, the Falcons tried to do when they hired Rich McKay back in December of 2003, right? Because when you look at those active list of Super Bowl winning GMs, it's shorter than the active list of Super Bowl winning coaches currently in the NFL, right? Harbaugh and Tomlin are two of the latter when it comes to Super Bowl winning coaches. But like, who you're really poaching from another team that's built a successful team, it's like Les Snead. And it's like, are you really giving Les Snead, the credit for the success of the Rams, or are you giving that to Sean McVay? Like, you know what I'm saying? Similar to, what I was talking about with John Lynch in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, right? And it's like, okay, well, we'll trade picks to the Rams to get Les Snead back in Atlanta because Blank has a relationship with him because Les Snead was in Atlanta before he went to LA, right? And then, that also clears the path for Rich McKay's son to become the new GM of the Rams. It's, it's all nepotism, baby, but, it's it's all a conspiracy, but you're less likely to have that all powerful GM, right? Because the Falcons tried that with Rich McKay. It led to Jim Mora and Bobby Petrino, so that didn't work out. They tried to do it again with Bill Parcells in 2008, and Bill Parcells spurned him for Miami, and the Falcons wound up hiring Thomas Dimitroff, and they ultimately wound up drafting Matt Ryan, and that was kind of the domino that they needed to fall to get Matt Ryan here in Atlanta, because Bill Parcells went to Miami with the number one pick, and because Bill Parcells was not a Matt Ryan guy, they passed on Matt Ryan with the number one pick and took Chad Henne at the top of round 2, and Matt Ryan fell into the Falcons' lap at number 3. So I guess it all comes full circle. So, we'll see on that front. But all that to sit here and say, I do think, if the Falcons are trying to reel in the big fish, that could save Raheem's job more likely than it would save Terry's job, is basically what I'm getting at. So we'll see on that front. Tomlin, as I said, has an option after this year. McDermott, I think, is signed through the 2027 season. Harbaugh signed through 2028. I don't know what Kevin Stefanski's contract is, because of those 4 guys, Stefanski is the likeliest to become available this offseason. So we'll see. But it does feel like there's a ticking clock if Blank wants to make the big splash, right? If he's just tired of hiring the up-and-coming guy and hoping that guy's going to be better than what he is, and he just wants to get a proven guy in here, these are the potential options for the Falcons that are available, and I could see the Falcons trying to go for that given Blank's history and background. So we'll see on that front. But that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Tomorrow we'll be breaking down whatever happens in this Rams game, whatever Les Snead's the Les Snead-led Rams do against the Atlanta Falcons. Oh yeah, and Sean McVay, whatever, he's going to be there. We'll be breaking that on tomorrow's postcast. We'll be giving you an hour-long postcast on Locked On Sports Atlanta as well, with myself, Jarvis Davis, and Tanitra Batiste, and I'm sure we'll have be touching upon some of this stuff as well with that. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, check out the Everydayer Club. If you want an ad-free version of Locked On Falcons, you can find it at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. $5 a month, $50 a year. It's all available, as well as the other perks of joining the Everydayer Club in the link in the description below. Guys, appreciate it. If you want to catch up on all the Week 17 action, Locked On NFL is a perfect second listen for you. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.